The Retirement Cafe podcast, Aging Without Children, with Kirsty Woodard. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast with me, your host, Justin King. If you're thinking about your retirement or already retired, you're in the right place. My aim is to help you plan for and live a successful and meaningful retirement. Retirement is far more than just a financial event. It's a significant life event, a major transition, which will bring with it new challenges and opportunities. So each episode contains tips, information, and inspiration to help you feel more informed and confident about your retirement. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast. It's great to have you join me. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Kirsty Woodard. Kirsty has spent her career in the health and social sector and noticed that most of the support around ageing is reliant upon children and grandchildren. In 2014, Kirsty founded Aging Without Children. This organisation was dedicated to creating solutions for those who do not have family to rely upon. While the organisation closed in 2019, Kirsty works still tirelessly to help the invisible million. In our conversation, Kirsty and I discuss the impacts of not having children as we age, how current policies and procedures are not set up to help those aging without children, and what needs to change. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Kirsty. So, welcome to the podcast, Kirsty Woodard.
Hello, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Where are we finding you today, Kirsty? Where are you?
You're finding me. You're finding me in my dining room in Rington, where I live, which is a little village about 15 miles sort of south of Bristol in North Somerset.
Sounds delightful. Sounds delightful. Now, we're going to chat today about aging without children, and this is your area of expertise. How did that come about?
How did that come about?
You haven't got children, so I mean that's a first start.
That would be the first thing. It's kind of one of those interesting things where you have your work life and you have your personal life, and you don't really kind of mix them too much. So I've worked on issues around aging since 1993. So wow. God, wow. a long time, nearly 30 years. And I've done various things around aging. But I started off sort of primarily around the advice and advocacy side, so working with people on an individual level. And then I managed a virtual healthy living centre in London for older people. And then I worked with, as Age Concern England as it was then, in their policy and research unit, and then I went to become a freelance consultant, and I've worked doing that now for about 13 years, and all of that was that was work. And then parallel to that, I it kind of became increasingly obvious that I was actually never going to be able to have children of my own. And it wasn't something that I'd ever really thought about in relation to work. It was, that was my personal life, and that was it. And then one day I was having coffee with a friend of mine, and we knew each other through our Age Concern England work. We'd known each other for a long time, and we were having a coffee, and she was telling me about the difficulties she was having with her mum, who had been in hospital after a fall. And it was one of those kind of like very kind of like common tales, something you hear every day when you worked at Age Concern, which was, her mum had been in hospital and she'd had to go up there every day to make sure that she was, able to eat her dinner, because there wasn't really anyone to help, sit with her and help her eat, and that, that she had everything she needed, and, to fill in all the forms you have to fill in and have all the conversations with people you have to have, and to talk to social services about getting a care package. And so the care package that she'd had, the care package was arranged, and then when her mother came out of hospital, the care package didn't really work. The equipment that was needed wasn't really delivered, and when she phoned up social services, they were like, it will take us about a week to deliver what you need.
Right.
But if you can drive to the depot, we can give it to you and everything. And so she's, bearing in mind she's also working full time, and so she's sort of like venting away, and at the end of it she just said to me, God knows what she'd do if I wasn't here. And it was one of those real light bulb moments, because I was like, yeah, what would she do if you weren't there? And it was just at the time when I was kind of in my mid-40s where I'd kind of finally drawn a line under, okay, I'm never going to have a child. And I thought, so, yeah, what would your mum do? What will I do? What about all these people who are going to be in my situation or already are in my situation? And so it started, that was the kind of like the point at which it started, and that was in 2014.
So the key thing is that one of the statistics I've picked up from wanting to have a conversation with you today about this is that 1 million people over 65 currently don't have children, and I think that's supposed to double by 2030.
Yeah.
So this is significant, isn't it? Because children do historically. I mean, I know from the clients that we serve that we serve a lot of families, and the adult children are picking up a lot of the pieces for mum and dad. They're just, they're helping out, I suppose. That's kind of like the natural way of being. Hopefully that is the case, but that does leave, or could leave, a lot of challenges, as you mentioned there for your friend. So what's the solution to the problem, I suppose?
Well, I think the interesting thing is first of all, it needs to be recognised that it is an issue, because one of the real challenges that I had, because I'd been around older people's stuff for so long, I thought that once I kind of raised it, people would go, oh, yeah, of course, obviously. But one of the really interesting things was when I first started to talk about it, it was kind of hand waved away as if I was like making a fuss about nothing, And what people repeatedly said to me was, well, most people don't look after their parents. And so, kind of quickly what I kind of had to be, and one of the things I've learned about doing this over 6 years is I have to be very clear about what I'm talking about. Because when I talk about, supporting their parents or caring for their parents, it's exactly what you're talking about. No, the vast majority of people are not providing intimate personal care to their parents. They're not. No. But what they're doing is that everyday low level, picking up the pieces, helping with the shopping, phoning up the bank or the insurance company if there's a problem, providing reassurance, helping out if there's a crisis. So if you've had your knee replaced and, if you're ordinarily fine to get about, but you've had a knee replacement, so you just need help for a couple of weeks because you can't get on with things. It's all that everyday stuff. And that, ironically, are the things that are much, much harder to replace, because the state will generally step in. If you get to the point where you can't feed, dress or wash yourself, generally speaking, the state will be able to step in at that point. But what the state doesn't do is step in at any point before that. And so finding solutions to that everyday low level help is much more difficult. And so,
so what do people do? What would your recommendations be? Or I appreciate you're not there yet, but I mean, what do you think that your plans will be?
I think one of the things when I first started to work on this and was talking to people aging without children, there's a couple of things. One is about putting people aging without children in touch with each other so they can support each other. So one of the things I did very quickly was to set up a Facebook group for people so they could get in touch with each other online, and that group's got about just over 2,000 members now, I think. And there are some groups that, pandemic aside, would meet face to face in York and in Leeds and in Bradford. And so partly it's about being able to support each other. Partly it's about being able to share information about what that is out there, because there are, one of the things that I know from working on older people stuff for so long is there actually is a phenomenal range of services and help out there. The difficulty is that people don't know about it.
Sure.
And one of the kind of the ironic things again about people aging without children is what we do know is that when older people need help, it's primarily their adult children who find the information. Yeah. They get on Google, they go through the council's website, they phone people up and say, like, this is the problem with my mum and my dad. Well, what can you do to help? And they kind of find their way through the maze. If you don't have that and you've got to rely on yourself, some people can do that. But what we know, obviously, is that once we get over the age of 75, at the moment, internet use kind of goes off a cliff.
Right.
So, and pretty much everything is online. So people who aren't online, older people who aren't online and don't have any family support, it's really difficult for them to find help. And one of the real challenges that I've talked about in the past is, again, when older people are having problems and struggling, the people who tell their stories, the people who make that known, are generally their children. So if someone's having a bad time in hospital or bad time in a care home, or their carers aren't turning up or whatever, it's generally speaking their adult children who make a fuss about it.
Yeah.
If you don't have anyone make a fuss about it, it's like, well, who would know? And people have said to me, well, who would know? If I have dementia and the carers that were meant to turn up don't turn up, who would know that? Who would know? One of the ideas that we kind of came up with when we had an organisation working on this was something that we called Alterkin, which was alternative kin. And it was about, and it was very much a sort of like a blue sky thing of, could you set up a circle of support around people, provide, social companionship, which would provide, advice, some advocacy support, sort of some practical help, and would also very early on encourage people to make some plans for their later life. Because obviously, as you know from what you do, one of the things we're kind of terrible at is putting things off around old age. Don't want to think about that, because we're not going to get old. We're going to stay as we are, and then one day we're going to die. There's not going to be no intervening period where we get very old and frail and need help. That doesn't happen to us, of course. No. So one of the things, we, have said constantly to people is, you need to think about your old age. You need to think about what happens if the worst happens. What happens if you get ill? What happens if you can't live in your house anymore? What happens if you need care? What are you going to do? And how is that going to happen? And so our idea of Alterkin was, could you do that? Could you set up a circle of support around people and help them make a plan? And then as their kind of like life changed, help them implement their plan and put those things in place.
Brilliant. So, yeah, I'm just thinking that if someone listening to this and thinking, well, this is me, and if this is me, I would lay a bet they'd be worried.
Yeah.
As you're 75, you're 80. And, there's also, we're lucky. I give a little story. A client of mine who is out of area, actually, some miles from our office. But she sent me an email the other day and said, hi, Justin, I've got a cash ISA maturing, and as we all know in this current interest rate environment, that cash ISA maturing, it was a fixed rate at 2.5% or something, and now it's renewing at next to nothing. So then she said, she's always been very good at finding her savings rates, on the internet. So she's in her late 70s now, but she's always been quite good at finding her best savings rate. So she, anyway, of course, she couldn't find anything to speak of, and then somehow got attracted to a website that was promising, 4.5% or 5% or something, and she sent me an email and said, "What do you think of this?" And I had a quick look at it and went, "Well, I think it's a sham. I think it's sadly, I think it's all a problem, and they're not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority, and where we go, and please don't do anything about it. And of course, I got on the phone the next day to her, and we solved her problem. Now, you know, we're on the end of the phone and available to do that. And of course, she has got family, but family, you know, she's divorced, and family's probably not that kind of classic, you know, communication between kids and grandkids and all the rest of it. So we are a trusted advisor, and we've looked after her for 20 odd years. So no problem at all. She has someone to call. But a lot of time people don't have someone to call, do they? So how would people, what would your recommendation to be to someone who was thinking, you know, I'm getting on, you know, actually a lot of my neighbours or the people, my friends are of the same age.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest that they did? What was the kind of the plan of action that they could go and put into place? What would you advise, you know, your favourite aunt who was living 100 miles away from you to do at this moment in time with these worries and fears?
I mean, fortunately, there are lots of things online. You know, I know that not everybody is online, but it is a good starting point if you are.
Yeah.
There are lots of things there are lots of tools that you can download which help you think through what are the things I need to put in place for my later life, and it kind of asks you questions. You know, what happens in the event of a crisis? So, you know, who do we contact? You know, who do you get in touch with? Who needs to know this?
Have you got any specific kind of websites that people should go to?
Off the top of my head, no.
No problem. Maybe you can provide some, and we'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do that.
In the show notes, because of course that would be a great resource, I'm sure.
Yeah, I did do a webinar on planning for later life, and I'll send you the link to that, and that's got a lot of resources in there.
Perfect.
So,
thank you.
But yeah, so there's lots of tools out there to help you to think. Your local Age UK is always a good starting point, because often local Age UKs will then have contacts with local advisors that can help. And they can also talk through some of people's worries, because often you know, you kind of forget when you're sort of like steeped in sort of health and social care policy stuff, like I have been for nearly 30 years, is that most people don't actually really know how it works. No. Most people don't really know how social services works. Most people really don't know how the benefit system works. So to talk to your local Age UK, all of whom have an information and advice service which is free, to talk to them, have a conversation with them, and they will be a brilliant starting point in either being able to help you directly themselves, or to be able to signpost you to other places who'll be able to give you some advice.
Great. Yeah, useful. So does government policy need to change around this? Does our philosophy as a you know, population need to shift? What are your thoughts? What would you like, you know, if I gave you the magic wands for the afternoon, what would you wish to happen?
I mean, the answer to both of those is yes. I mean, culturally, we need to get our heads around the idea that we are a society that isn't like it was not even 20 years ago. In a single generation, the number of people who don't have children has doubled. And that's a massive demographic shift. We haven't seen a demographic shift like this since the First World War, and obviously, unfortunately, so many men were killed and so many women were therefore left unmarried and without children. So we have this massive demographic shift. And unfortunately, policy hasn't caught up with that at all. So policy is constantly starts from the point of older people have family, and therefore that family will step in and make things happen. I mean, it was really interesting when the pandemic started and the first sort of like lot of guidance was issued. The British Gerontological Society published a response to it, which was really good. And one of the things they said was, this guidance is predicated on the idea that you live with somebody. It works on the basis that everybody lives with somebody, because all the things it tells you to do about self-isolating, you know, take your temperature, do this, do that, only works if there's another person in the house. So, you know, the government struggles to get its head around the idea that people live on their own for a start. It also struggles to get its head around the idea that older people are not necessarily grandparents or parents. And it's one of the things that it's so baked into our system that it's almost invisible, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because if you ever read policy documents on aging and older people, it will always say older people in their family. It's never even kind of acknowledged that there may be older people who are not part of a family. It's always there. And so you have to kind of really dig deep down into our assumptions about our society and how it is now, and start to kind of like strip away some of that thinking about, as I've said to hospitals that I've talked to, look at your hospital discharge policy and take out everywhere you assume that there'll be somebody to do something. That isn't you. That isn't the state. So if it's not you and it's not social services, how does this happen if there isn't someone else to come and do it? And it is quite an instructive exercise, because once you start thinking, all right, so who does bring in their wash bag, and who does see what other help is out there, and who is with them if bad news has to be broken, and who will bring up their phone charger if they forgot it, and who will remember all the messed stuff about the medication which they're being told but they're in pain and they don't really remember it. So there's a real kind of like, we need to fundamentally shift at a cultural level and at a policy level, but I don't believe the policy shift will come until we've achieved that kind of shift in thinking. I think that's what needs to happen first.
Yeah. So, I mean, my takeaway from that, of course, is that as always, we've got to rely on our own kind of sense of planning and getting our affairs in order and getting things correct, and then trying to create a network of people around us who will be able to help. And I think that would be invaluable. I was just thinking, as you were saying that story there, we were chatting with our 93-year-old neighbour the other day, who's amazingly fit and takes hot dog for a walk and things like that, and goes and visits the 100-year-old neighbour, around the corner, to check that she's okay.
She's old.
Absolutely. She was, but she was saying that last year that she had a mole that she had to get looked at by the doctor on her back, and the doctor said, well, I'm going to take some pictures of it, etc. And in the old days, I think, or maybe previously, you would 12 months later they'd say, well, pop back in and we'll have another look at it and see if it's changed shape or anything. But now it's up to you to check. Well, here's a picture, take the picture away, and it's up to you now to check the picture. Well, of course, now that's relatively easy to do, possibly if it's on your back of your hand or something.
Yeah.
But if well, I don't know. I'm 50, and I struggle to look in the mirror and check something on my back. And of course, again, it's a similar thing, isn't it? As you rightly say, that unless you've got someone to do that for you, that's and however well we get on, it's not probably something that she's going to ask me to do either, or want to anyway. Huge challenges, and this is a highly important topic to bring to people's attention. So
it's quite difficult as well, as kind of like the boundaries about what you can, the differences between friends and family. Because one of the other kind of, myths about not having children is that essentially if you don't have children, what you've done, as particularly if you're a woman, is you've then lived your life as kind of like Sex and the City. So you have a big gang of girl mates, and what you do is you spend money on clothes and booze and going out, and that's what you do. And so when you get old,
is that not true?
Tragically not, which is disappointing for all of us, frankly. But that you'll have this kind of like group of friends around you, and then when you get old, you'll all support each other and all of that. But one of the things is like the boundaries between what you can ask friends to do and what you can ask family to do. And this is kind of always illustrated for me by my husband's grandmother. Now, she had lived in the same house for 70 years. And she had fabulous neighbours. So we lived closest to her, and we lived over an hour away. She had fantastic neighbours. And as she got old, she was getting older, and it was more difficult to get out. And her neighbour went shopping for her twice a week, which was brilliant. And then one day we came down, and the fridge seemed to be full of an enormous amount of milk. And the house seemed to have an enormous amount of bananas in them, but there didn't seem to be an awful lot else. I really thought, this is a bit strange. So my husband popped round to see the neighbour and was like, milk and bananas. And she said, yes. She said, oh, thank God you're here. She said, I always go shopping for her. She said, and that's all she asks me to get. She said, but she's not eating or drinking anything. She said, I've been really worried, and I asked her to go to the doctors and she won't go. And she said, and it's not my place to phone up the doctors on her behalf. And so my husband's like, okay, right, thank you for letting me know. And so when he came back and he said, why are you telling the neighbour to buy these milk and bananas, and why aren't you eating all of that? And it turned out that she actually felt dreadfully ill, hadn't wanted to bother the doctor in the usual way. And my husband was like, right, I'm phoning the doctor then. And he was like, I can phone the doctor because I'm her grandson. And so when they say, who are you? I'm her grandson. If I'd been her next door neighbour, the next door neighbour didn't feel it was her place to push at all, or to phone the doctor. She was like, that's not my place. She has family. It's her family's place to do it. And again, so even with the best will in the world, if friends want to help, sometimes it's not possible, plausible. I was talking to a friend of mine the other week, and someone she used to work with had collapsed with a massive stroke and been taken into hospital, didn't have any children, was unmarried. And when she phoned up to find out how she was, they were like, we're terribly sorry, we can't tell you, you're not a relative. So our systems also kind of mitigate against friends helping, even if they want to help. Often it's like, well, we can't tell you that because you're not a relative. We can't tell you that because you're not you're not the next of kin. Yeah. So again, we kind of need to think far more about what do we mean by what do we mean by family? What is it fair to expect friends and neighbours to do, and communities to do? And if we are going to expect friends, neighbours and communities to do more, how do we then change our systems and processes to accommodate that, and not automatically go, well, if you're not blood related, then we're not going to tell you anything?
Yeah. I can imagine the instant fear trying to get past the gatekeeper at the GPs. I have fear of that myself sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
and I'm the patient.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can start to see the myriad of issues that this places, and I think it's fantastic that you're bringing this to everyone's attention. Kirsty, thank you so much for chatting to me today. Where can people find out more about you and the great work that you do?
The best place to start is there is a website, www.awok.org, which I can send you the link to in the notes.
And that's AWOC is obviously Aging Without Children.
Aging Without Children, yeah. There are hopes that we might be able to. The organisation was originally unable to get funding, but we kind of have hopes we might be able to have sort of like another go at setting it up. So, so that will be the place to find out information about that, and that's got email and everything on there. So that would be the best place to start.
Perfect, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for spending the afternoon chatting to me, and I think it's fantastic that you're bringing this to people's attention, because it's definitely a huge social need that people need to be talking about.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks, Kirsty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks once again to Kirsty for sharing her story with us. To find out more about Aging Without Children, check out the show notes on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk, where you'll find some useful links. Let me know your thoughts or any thoughts you have on this topic by getting in touch either on Twitter at JustinKingCFP or email me at hello@theretirementcafe.co.uk. So until next time, this is Justin King helping you feel more informed in your retirement. you.